So I want to welcome everybody on this terrible day, which is going to be brightened by our speaker, but I want to congratulate all of you for showing up. Also, as is our custom, we're going to introduce ourselves so that the speaker and everybody else knows who's in the room. Identify yourself by your organization, if you are part of an organization in the community, and where you're from in the community. I'm going to send this mic around. Please speak loudly so everybody can hear you, because this mic is going to pick it up for the camera so that the people who watch this recorded session will know who you are too. Thanks. I'm Elaine Chapnick, president of the local summit. Shirley. Speak directly into it like this.
I'll use my preaching voice. Good morning, Shirley Hilton, Summit Board, Human Rights Board, Village of Mamaroneck.
Good morning. Malcolm Froman, board member of the Summit and president of Larchmont Mamaroneck Hunger Task Force, and I live in Larchmont.
Good morning. Sabrina Fiddleman, Summit Board, Hunger Task Force, and LMC-TV Board. Thank you for coming to visit the Summit.
John Verney, formerly of New Rochelle, now of Mamaroneck, and on the LMC board with Sabrina.
Fran Snedeker, Village of Larchmont.
Nancy White, Summit Board, President of the Historical Society of Larchmont, and Larchmont Chamber of Commerce Board member.
Julian Block of Larchmont, member of At Home on the Sound.
Jeff Megan, Summit Board, LMC-TV Board.
Janet Buckbinder, Summit Board and Radar.
Janet O'Connell, Larchmont resident, At Home on the Sound board member and Summit board member.
Ernie Odierna, Deputy Supervisor, Town of Mamaroneck, and Larchmont Mamaroneck Rotary.
Catherine Parker, County Legislator.
Brian Kerr from Mamaroneck, and I go to SUNY Purchase.
Ira Block, I'm from Larchmont, and I sit on the Town of Mamaroneck Planning Board.
Doris Block, Summit Board and Hunger Task Force Steering Committee.
Jane Elkind-Eny, Councilwoman, Town of Mamaroneck.
Good morning, I'm Yvonne Trapp, Mental Health Association Board, volunteer with foster children, and I would love to tell you proudly that I was just named Volunteer of the Year in New York State.
Adrian Pugin, Larchmont resident.
Mike Rosenbaum, Mamaroneck resident.
Mike Rahimi, also Mamaroneck resident.
Michael Murphy, Murphy Brothers Contracting.
Frank Owens, Larchmont resident and part of the first Solarize campaign in Westchester.
Ann Bukowski, Summit Board, St. Augustine Church.
Mary Lee Berridge, Summit Board, Interfaith Council, and Women's Club. I'd love for you to please remember who I am for a special reason. It's $8. This is the envelope, and there is a sign-up sheet going around. We'd love your emails so we can send you notices of further meetings. Thank you.
Dave Finch, Trustee, Board of Trustees, Mamaroneck, Rhinebeck resident.
Maura Carlin, resident of the Town of Mamaroneck, LMC-TV Board, and the Local Live.
Good morning, Keith Yiser, Mamaroneck Public Schools, Summit Board, Human Rights Committee. And we have an upcoming event coming in next month in January regarding human rights and voting rights. So please attend. One is at the library on January 10th, Mamaroneck Free Library, and the other one is the Larchmont Library. So we would like for you to attend. Thank you.
Good morning, Ann McAndrews, Mayor of the Village of Larchmont.
Bob Hayden, Summit Board, At Home in the Sound.
David Keys, Summit Board, Hispanic Resource Center.
Ernest Wong, Larchmont Avenue Church. I'm a resident of the Village of Mamaroneck.
John Ferris, Village of Mamaroneck, Larchmont Avenue Church, and HRC Board.
Josh Shapiro, Larchmont resident.
Jane Orance, head of the board of the Community Counseling Center, Summit Board, and general nuisance in the village of Larchmont.
I'm Susan Riley, the director of the Mamaroneck Public Library. Just wanted to remind everybody that the library's budget vote and trustee election is tomorrow. Thank you.
Janet DeMacy, resident of Mamaroneck, Summit Board, and co-president of the Center for Continuing Ed.
Jacqueline Plumet, Larchmont resident.
Paul Galvez, Larchmont resident.
Mal Shaker, new resident of the city of Rye, formerly of the town of Mamaroneck.
Renee DeFries, at Home on the Sound and the Women's Club.
Nina Resiacuddy, vice president of the Summit, Larchmont Midnight Run, St. Augustine's Church.
Ned McCormick, communications director and senior advisor to the county executive.
Great. Okay. Before we begin, we always have our 2-minute tidbit. Jeff Megan, he gives us a bit of local history.
Good morning, everybody. I feel like a warm-up act.
Yes, you are.
And I think of these tidbits, for those of you who hadn't been here before, there's sort of a little bit of an oral history that ties the three communities together. And I usually have a new subject every month, but not this month, because last month I did houses of worship, and I'm going to sort of continue that a little bit. I mean, Hanukkah's around the corner and Christmas is around the corner. And I first want to start with a big mistake that I made last week. We had Rose Noonan from the Housing Action Council and Catherine Parker talking about affordable housing, and I made sort of a joke about the First Baptist Church. Keith will get me on this, that every time it rains, it's a good thing it's Baptist because it floods and the entire church gets baptized. But the big thing about that church is that it used to have a Pastor Garland, and out of that grew a wonderful woman named Marzella Garland, who was the co-founder of the Washingtonville Housing Alliance, who was 25 years ago, this was an organization that specialized in affordable housing in the village of Mamaroneck, and actually partnered with the First Baptist Church on many of those. We have, the Washingtonville Housing Alliance has many buildings currently around town. They were the sponsor of the Mamaroneck Towers 202 building on Halstead Avenue. So I wanted to make sure I had that connection. And Rose Noonan worked with us with the Washingtonville Housing Alliance for all those years. It was really, really kind of neat. So I wonder if you remember, how many churches do we have? 21. Thank you. Boy, what school did you go to, Mamaroneck or Rhinebeck? How many Roman Catholic? 4. Very good. How many synagogues? 4. Very good. And of course that leaves how many Protestant? You see, the Protestants can't make up their minds, so they split up into all of these different churches. So we have 2 Episcopalian churches, and my father used to say Episcolopian. 1 Presbyterian, 1 Lutheran, 1 Methodist, 1 AME Zion, 1 Christian Science, 1 Seventh-day Adventist, 2 Baptist, and 3 Pentecostal born again. I mean, we really cover the whole Megillah. And a lot of these churches are very old. Larchmont, St. Augustine's began in 1892 in a house on the corner of Beach and Linden. They didn't have the current edifice until many years later. Up until, the Larchmont Temple, which I think is a great looking building and a great organization. That was 1948, and 14 people met in the home of the Belchezes. And I read that, and I said, geez, I went to school with Wendy Belchez. So it's sort of, it's a good feeling for me. We have some very old churches, or we have 2 Catholic churches in Mamaroneck, which unfortunately are going to be reduced to 1. Holy Trinity they've announced, the Archdiocese has announced that church is going to close and join up with St. Vito's. And St. Vito's is sort of sort of the epitome of some of our waves of immigration. The Italian immigrants who built a lot of the village of Mamaroneck, Harbor Island, and so forth. The Irish, now the Hispanic, and of course they didn't cover the biggest wave of people, all those immigrants from Manhattan and Brooklyn, those young couples who are coming up here wave after wave of buying houses. So what do you think, who do you think is, what two churches are the oldest churches? Anybody have any idea? Keith, of course. That's one. All right, that's one contender. Who's the other one?
St. John's Episcopal.
Close, but not right. St. Thomas's. There you go. So, Methodist Church, John Wesley sent over Francis Asbury, and he preached in Mamaroneck on December 17th, 1771, in front of a tower, in front of a tavern where the sewage plant is today. But they met at the home of Hester Sands, and that's why we have Sand Street. Okay, a lot of these streets are named after her. So in 1814, they built their first physical church on the summit of Good Success Ridge, facing the Boston Post Road, now Prospect Avenue. It was also called High Street. And then the next building, which still stands today, is the current American Legion home. So all of you who go and have a drink at the American Legion home, remember, you're in a Methodist hall. Then they sold the next door property to raise money to build a new church, and that was sold to the free kindergarten of the town of Mamaroneck for $2,000. And my father went to kindergarten there. In 1859, they built their current building, a Gothic Revival building, which has been redone many times, particularly when the bell fell about 20 years ago and Pastor Bill had to raise money. So, but the winner is St. Thomas's. It goes back to Caleb Heathcote. And again, my father says Heathcote. That's really how you pronounce it. And they, on their website, they're 1704. Is when they first congregated. And in 1814, they elected John Peter Delancey, whose daughter Susan was the wife of James Fenimore Cooper. It goes on and on and on, all through history until they built the current building, which was built in honor of Mrs. Constable. And thank God for Arnold Constable, because it's resulted in a beautiful church. So, during the holidays, amen, have a good time.
Thank you, Jeff. Oops, careful. Not trip. Westchester County Executive Rob Astorino was elected to office in 2009 and re-elected in 2013. A lifelong resident of Westchester, he lives with his wife and 3 children in Hawthorne, New York. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you County Executive Rob Astorino.
Thanks, Elaine. Good morning, everybody. It's good to be back. This is, I think, my 3rd time, right?
Right.
3rd time.
Right.
And I have very, well, mixed emotions about this diner. You know why? The night of the hurricane 2 years ago, we were on this side of the county often, and we were leaving the harbor area, which was completely flooded out, and we stopped here sometime around 8 or 9 o'clock at night, whatever, and it was full because people didn't have power and they were doing anything for a meal. And we were here and all night. We were here about maybe an hour or so, and I didn't even get a morsel in my mouth because everyone kept coming up to us. Here's my address, call Con Ed, and when are they going to get the lights on? But it was an interesting night because you really, and I did too, really get an understanding of exactly what the needs were, not only here, but we were all over the county. And the frustrations that were growing. Some, I think, were over-exaggerated, but others had some real needs. You know, when there's a difference between your lights are off and coming back in a day and you're flooded out. And so we try to deal with everything in a prioritized way, even though for everybody, they were the #1 priority. So it's an interesting thing to be here again. I'm glad to be back on a rainy day, hurricane-like, but it's good to be with you. What I want to do is just give you a real quick overview and then just sort of open it up to any kind of questions that you have on any topic. So today at 11 o'clock this morning, Catherine Parker and 16 of her colleagues are going to be voting on the budget for the county board as they meet today at 11 o'clock. Our budget, which we presented for the 5th straight year, all 5 years in office, no tax increase. We've had a tax cut and 4 freezes. And that really is what I think is vital. You know, government needs to live within its means. Prior to us getting into office, county taxes had gone up 17%. Spending was up 25%. And, you know, to me, we can do better. We can provide essential services, but also live within our means, as most people have to do, especially in the worst part of the economy that we were dealing with. And for me, I don't want to get out of the bad habits just because we're getting a little bit better financially as the economy starts to get better. We're looking ahead. Well, we'll have money to spend. That's what got us in these bad habits and put us in a bad spot when I got in there. So we presented a budget which is balanced, which, again, for the 5th straight year, does not raise county property taxes, lives within our means, and I think this is important because I talk about these 3 Ps all the time, promoting economic growth, which we're going to be doing a lot of next year again with some projects that we'll be coming out with, preserving essential services, that is making sure that government does what it's supposed to do for those most in need, and, of course, protecting the taxpayers. And of all those 3, by the way, the first one I mentioned, promoting economic growth, is the most important because that pays for the first 2. That's how we have the good economy and the revenue that comes in to keep taxes flat and also make sure that we can pay for the services that we need. So the budget is in the county board's hands. We've been negotiating now for several weeks on items of importance to various legislators, different philosophies, etc. But I believe that as of today, we have a budget that will be adopted by at least a majority, hopefully many more, of the county board members. So that is one thing off the end of the list. Many things that are ongoing. Playland, which of course we can have a substantive conversation about today, is ongoing. It is something that to me is important for this county, that we continue to have Playland as a beautiful park, but we take the ugly side of Playland away. The ugly side is what you don't generally see, and that's the finances. The finances of Playland have been a disaster for a very long time. And last year we had an increase in attendance and an increase in revenue. You know why? Because Joe Rayo said it's going to be sunny tomorrow, so people would come. But that's not a business model. A business model is not praying that we don't have a day like this. A business model is making Playland a 12-month per year venue, so we can bring revenue in on a day like this and a month like this when the park generally is closed. The amusement park is generally closed. So we're working with Dan Biederman, who of course brought the area in Manhattan that was dead for a very long time, Bryant Park, brought that back to life. It's now one of the most vibrant areas of New York City. Dan is doing a report for us, which is due back within 2 weeks or so at the end of the year, and giving his thoughts on how we can get Playland more revenue and make it a year-round proposition again. So there's a lot of different things. We're dealing with the housing, of course, which is ongoing. Of course, the local elected officials here know about that because you've been injected into this by the federal government. And I see our supervisor and our mayor and town board members. This is an issue that we've been dealing with since day one, January 1st, 2010, when I walked into office. We inherited this from County Executive Spano. But we've been dealing with this in an ongoing way to move the housing along that needs to be done, the requirements of the settlement, which no matter where you fall on the issue, it needs to get done. And we have said from day one, we're going to make sure it gets done. We're also going to make sure, to the best of our ability, we keep it within budget. And we work collaboratively with all of our communities, because this could have been the nightmare of all nightmares for every community. This could have been the NIMBYism. This could have been pitchforks at the town board meetings and the village board meetings, and we've seen none of that because we've worked collaboratively with our communities, with the stakeholders, to get this done in a good way. The problem has been the federal government has demanded things from our county that, quite frankly, none of us agreed to. My predecessor didn't agree to, and it's been a moving target ever since. And the communities who were put on the bad list, even when they get off the bad list, the federal government doesn't accept it. And so we're dealing with this, even though the communities per se are not necessarily part of the settlement, it's the counties. But in order to fulfill the settlement, we have to build in communities where the county doesn't control zoning. The communities control local land use. So there's a lot of issues that are tied up into this one big settlement that unfortunately gets portrayed for the wrong reasons as the county versus the federal government, the county's obstinance, and worse. When we're just saying, get out of our way, let us do what we're supposed to do, and we'll finish this, and we'll work with our communities, and we'll make the changes necessary. That has not been good enough for the federal government. So I just open it up to any questions that you might have, and we can sit here and just yap all morning. Hopefully it won't end up like the show Eaten Alive. Who saw that the other night? Did you ever see that? Disappointing, huh? Jeez, a little tension from the snake, and he gives up. Yes, sir. Yes. Good morning.
Really, it's two questions. First question would be in regard to county budget.
Yes, sir.
First question is in regard to the county budget, and in terms of the mix and the match. And I know we have to meet the budget. I know that our board is voting on it. Hopefully that they'll come to an agreement with your budget, but there are some discrepancies regarding how you're saving us as taxpayers money. In other words, it's like a rob Peter to pay Paul type mix and match. And one of the things that I was informed regarding how you're borrowing money, which down the line will eventually impact the taxpayers. That's the first question. The second question was sustainable playland, which if you want to answer that question first, I can get back to it.
Okay. Two small topics you picked.
Yeah.
All right, we'll start off with sustainable playland, and we're.
I didn't ask a question about sustainable.
Oh, what was?
No, I would want you to address that. Well, if you want to start with sustainable playland, my question regarding that is this. You mentioned that it's going to be a year-round venue.
Yes.
And as a result of it being a year-round venue, during what is called the amusement season, the majority of the patronage of Playland are not Westchester County residents. It's coming from the Bronx, the city, those who will say Playland is a recreational alternative. Then to have it as a year-round venue, we've had other recreational alternatives because this is Westchester County, and it has gone from what Playland traditionally was as a family, recreational, and with all the schools like we here at the Homics, we have the ice rink, so we no longer use Playland ice rink, wherein at one time everybody was using the ice rink. My question regarding that is this. When it said a sustainable Playland, it was also offered that these private venues, and you use Bryant Park as an example. Bryant Park sits in the middle of Manhattan Island on 42nd Street. Is that also something that's private, or is it still New York City parks?
Both.
So what would be the Playland venture?
A public-private partnership is really what it is. Same thing with Bryant Park, where they have the deal with New York City to own it, not own it, but operate it, which they do very well, just like what they did with Woolman's Rink in Central Park, where government, quite frankly, didn't do it well and couldn't do it cheaper than private could. And so they turned it over on a management and a license agreement. What we want to do with Playland is to make it a year-round venue where families do come back, where we're not, going to pass or fail, succeed or fail because of weather, but have enough things to do where people would come on a winter day to go to a nice restaurant because the view is amazing. The Children's Museum is up and running. I just spoke to them the other day. They're looking at hopefully sometime by the end of next year to be in full operation. Whether or not that happens, we hope they do, because we gave them the go-ahead. We want them to move, and we want them to be successful. The ice rink is something that was battered very badly by the hurricane. It took quite a while for a lot of different reasons, but after $5 million put into it with the new company coming in now that has already taken over the day-to-day operations, even though we own it, they're managing it and running it. They're going to put in up to another $1 million in refurbishments over there for the locker rooms and the general facilities in the middle, the food. So they're going to make it a better experience for people, and more people will come. The issue with why did it take so long, and I know we had complaints from some of the hockey leagues and other people, because of the historic nature of the building, we couldn't just go down to Home Depot and get plywood and fix it because of the architecture. You had to do it the right way and the old way. So it was a very intricate design, and it took a long time. Plus, it got caught up in all the red tape because we were looking for FEMA money and all this other stuff. So it took a while. We basically said, we're just going to go do it, and then we'll deal with the reimbursement later. So it's now operating. Go visit Playland Ice Casino. It looks better, and it will look even better when they're done with all the work. So Playland is something that I think the county loves. I love Playland. I've been going there since a little kid. I take my kids now to Playland. But the model that it's built on is just not what will sustain Playland going forward. It will if people are content with losing $5 million a year. I think there's better use of that kind of money than an amusement park. Having said that, it's a jewel and it needs to be fixed. So that's why we're working to fix it. On the budget, you know, first of all, every government borrows. There's things called bond anticipation notes, tax anticipation notes. So people are borrowing all the time. We have actually a low debt rate compared to most counties in the United States. So we have capital projects which we borrow for all the time, hundreds of millions of dollars. We also are getting out of the habit of what I inherited, and that is they drain the reserves and still raise taxes. We have stopped the draining of the reserves, which is supposed to be for emergencies. Now, here's the argument, okay, because this is the game that is politics. I could have put a budget that did not borrow for, or potentially borrow for, the $8 million in tax refunds that we might have next year. That's called tax certiorari's. We could have cashed them up, as we normally do, and that's the intent next year, is to go throughout the year and not have to borrow anything. Now, if I did my budget and put in there that we're going to cash up for the tax certiorari's and cash up for the pension obligations, which went from $69 million to $101 million in a year, we could have cashed all that up. Where are we going to find the $50 million? We could have raised taxes 7-8%, or we could have had $50 million in cuts. That would have been a hell of a lot of people and I had a lot of services. So if I had done that, what do you think the other side would have done? He's destroying everything. Services are cut and nobody can do anything. So I went this way to try to limit all of the layoffs we would have had and the services for short-term borrowing. It's short-term borrowing, if we need it at all. Our intention is to go through the rest of the year and find savings and to pay it up, just like we did with the pension. We ended up borrowing a lot less than we thought we would because we saved throughout the year. That's going to be the intention here. So the same people who voted for it once and now are trying to make it a political issue. In an ideal world, would we have borrowed short-term for some of these things? No, we would not have. That's not what I would have wanted to do. But the options are bad. So we took the best of the worst options. And by the way, like the pension, for instance, the state basically gives you no options. You either paid in full or you have to borrow from the retirement system itself, which by the way, the state does. The state borrows about $1 billion a year from its own retirement system. It is ludicrous, and you would not do that in private industry. But try to get some of the things done in government that you really should do. You get politics involved, you get the unions involved, then you get a judge that tells you got to put the jobs back. It gets crazy. If anyone ever read the book Good to Great, you would love to do that in private sector because it makes sense. You try to do that in the government and you can't do it. Yes, sir.
I wonder if you gave any consideration, if you had been governor, or now the governor was reelected, to what the state can do to help address the circumstances that have HUD and its monitor chasing the county down.
You know, this was an issue.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, the question was, as governor, or what this governor should do with regard to HUD. Obviously, Governor Cuomo lives in Westchester. He lives in one of the communities, Newcastle, which is where Chappaqua is, which is being attacked by HUD. And the governor was the former HUD secretary. So he has publicly stated that he's taking HUD's side, the federal government side. Now, there's an issue that is winding its way through the courts, an issue from Texas, which will be in the Supreme Court this year, a ruling by a federal judge in D.C., and this is called disparate impact. And this affects not only HUD, it affects labor, it affects many things. What disparate impact is, basically, it's statistics. Now, how many people here in Larchmont or Mamaroneck, raise your hand, if you, no, not yet, not yet. You may not want to raise this hand. Hold on. Let me ask the question. How many people here that live in Larchmont or Mamaroneck think that the community that you live in is discriminatory? Okay. Why do you live here, by the way? You know. Yeah. Or segregated.
Yeah.
The federal government has said that statistics only, no intent to discriminate is needed anymore. This was found to be not true by a federal judge under the Fair Housing Act. That intent is needed to prove discrimination and segregation. What the federal government is doing is saying, nope, through what's called disparate impact, they're going to use statistics that they're going to supply, by the way. And so if the town of Mamaroneck or Larchmont is overwhelmingly white, therefore the community is discriminatory and segregated, and zoning is the issue. Now, the fact that people can live where they want to live means nothing to them. But the regular restrictions in a zoning code, which basically every community has, that limits height or density or acreage or number of bedrooms, those are restrictive and those are discriminatory and those must go. So if you believe that there should be no zoning codes or any restrictions on acreage or height or density anywhere, then you're siding with the federal government in this. If you're like me and say, wait a minute, there are laws, those laws should be protected, there should be no discrimination. If a real estate agent, by the way, refuses to show a community or a home or a school district, that person is guilty. That person should be prosecuted. And I'll be the first to line up and say prosecute him or her. But if the issue is, should a community have the right, by the way, under the New York State Constitution, it does, if a community should have the right to plan and zone for itself, to say that we don't want 50-story buildings right on the coast, we prefer to have single-family homes, that's the issue. That's your choice. The federal government saying, no, we will decide. The bureaucrats in D.C. will decide, based on numbers, what should be developed in a community. That's the issue. Now, I have said, look, we're going to do everything that's in that settlement because that was agreed to by this county. What I'm not going to do is take this county and give away its rights to bureaucrats in D.C. That's been the fight. And I'll fight that until I'm out of office. Now, that issue that was just brought up, that we don't want poor people, that was just said out loud. So let me address that. To me, and no offense, that's a ridiculous statement. We are doing everything possible in the fourth most diverse county in all of New York State, in diversity as part of population in New York, it goes Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Westchester. 22% of our population is labeled as Hispanic, 15% African American. We're the 8th largest Jewish county in America. This is a very diverse county. It's diverse because we have laws and we have a welcoming society where people can move, just like previous immigrants did, move to where they choose to move or where they can afford to move. And then everyone moves to a new neighborhood when they can afford it. So to say that, as was labeled, by the way, by the governor, that our county keeps people out is something that I took offense to, and I thought he needed to apologize to the entire county for a statement like that. So that's the issue. And there might be a different viewpoint, and I respect your view, but I don't agree with it. Yes?
Hi, Nancy White from the We actually had a program here. We had a program here last month about the affordable housing issue, and I mean, I hear what you're saying about sort of like the big picture issue, but I think that what came out of that meeting, and maybe I'm totally misunderstanding, is that it's sort of like an issue of, you know, there's I guess a study that you need to say that Westchester County will participate in, and we are actually in compliance with all of those things, but not officially. And if we were just officially in compliance with those things, which you would just need to say, let's be part of this study, then we would not be losing the $16 million. We would be,
Okay.
you know, so that's.
You're talking about the analysis of impediments.
Yes.
We have done 8 versions of the analysis of impediment. Now, who did not raise their hand when I said that, do you think Larchmont and Mamaroneck is discriminatory and segregated and racist? You did not, right? If I tell you I'm going to give you money if you change your opinion, would you change your opinion? Okay, thank you. So that's what we're doing in Westchester. We have come to a conclusion 8 different times. Our planning department, Pace University, did a study independently of Westchester. The monitor, by the way, who oversees this settlement, who was hired by HUD and fired by HUD, so it's really a kangaroo court, he even came to the conclusion that just about every community in Westchester is not exclusionary in their zoning. Okay. So those are the facts that we have come to, and 2 independent studies came to. HUD has said to us, sorry, I don't care what 1 + 1 equals. Unless you say it equals 3, we're not going to give you the money. Now, would you want me to say, all right, whatever it takes, I'm just going to get the money, and we then will become a community that loses control of zoning and admits something that is not true? So, you know, I've worked with the towns here who, I think to some of their frustration too, worked with the monitor to do things that they requested, and then HUD still came back and is saying, not good enough. Not good enough. We don't believe you. All because of statistics. So, again, yes, we could, quote, take the money, but for what? To give up all of our rights and to come to a conclusion that just does not exist? Yes.
Just as a brief follow-up, my understanding was that the study that whatever it's called.
Analysis of impediments, yes.
Was sort of done unofficially, and we.
No, we submitted 8 of them. They didn't agree with the conclusions.
Well, okay, the Huntington analysis is what.
That's different.
Okay, all right.
Huntington analysis we've done the Berenson analysis. So too has the monitor. One says whether or not you have affordable housing and different types. One says whether people are clustered, minorities are clustered in an area. And, you know, again, we've gone through this. The monitor has gone through this. The monitor found in his report that there were a couple of communities that met his benchmark using his analysis and his statistics of not meeting the test for Berenson or Huntington. Most of the communities got a check mark. And some of those communities are working with the monitor. HUD says, wrong. We don't even accept what the monitor says, that it's just a couple. Everyone is guilty. You know, and So I could take the easy way out and say, fine, I don't care. I really don't care. I'll just, whatever you want, I'll just do. I'll just sign off. I'll give away the rights to the county. I'll just take the money. I don't care. But I'm not going to do that because it's not true. And the frustration level is that this county has, in all good faith, done exactly what we're supposed to do. We are well ahead of schedule in building the units. We've met the benchmark. Now, there's 7 years for this agreement. It started again the day I took office, January 1st, just by coincidence. Again, Spano and the county board ratified this in October of '9, and then I won the election, took over. So we have been dealing with this. We've been finding locations cooperatively. We've identified locations in all 31 communities as part of this settlement. We're working with developers. We're working with zoning boards and planning boards and town boards and village boards. And the question is, how could we be building these units in these zones if, as the federal government says, they're not allowed? How could we be doing that without zoning changes? They're going in as of right. So, you know, there's Washington's view, and then there's the reality. Washington also would have us not care about the money, because they've looked at a map, by the way. I was in the Secretary of HUD's office in D.C., and he takes out a map of Westchester. And he's looking around, and they're saying, well, what about all this up here, all this green space in northeastern Westchester? Why aren't you building there? I said, you mean in the New York City watershed area? Yes. I said, well, go talk to the EPA. We can't build there, and even if we could, there's no infrastructure. So what? Build it. You know, there's Washington's world, and then there's the reality of our world, as well as how to pay for something like that. So that's what we've been dealing with, and yes, it's very frustrating. And I know it gets into a neat little box, because one side says, oh, it's racism. And you're immediately on the defensive. You hate poor people. You're immediately on the defensive. No, that's not true. We're building, we're diverse, we're welcoming, but there are also rights and laws that need to be respected and cannot unilaterally be changed by a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C.
Other questions?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
If you took the money and said to HUD, okay, go ahead, what would they do?
I'm sorry, what was that?
If you took the money
If we took the money,
and said, okay.
well, they've conditioned it. It's conditional that we won't get the money. Yeah. Well, okay. I'm sorry. Finish the question. If we took the money.
It's just a global question. If you gave up.
Yes.
And said, okay, we'll take the money, go ahead and do what you're going to do, what would they do?
Well, yes. The question was, if we took the money from federal government, the CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant money, what would they do? Well, first of all, it's conditional. They have said you're not getting the money until you agree to these terms and until you agree and submit an analysis of impediment that we find acceptable, them, which would take away the restrictions in zoning codes that limit height and density and acreage in any neighborhood. And again, we have said, well, we can't do that. Plus, we don't control zoning. So they're asking us to do things that we don't even have the authority to do. And you know, that's been another part of this that's been very frustrating. The theoretical what? The question, again, the question is, first of all, the ironic part about this is most of the money is supposed to go to the poorest communities that are not even part of the settlement. Portchester, Peekskill, communities that are not part of the settlement. And so what we have said is, look, they're not even party to this. So release the money for them, and any of the money that is designated for the other 31 communities, and hold that back. But at least give the money to the communities who do need it and who want it. And they've said no. So that's their choice. But by the way, we are in the Second Circuit Court on this decision, arguing that HUD doesn't have the unilateral right to basically make it up as they go along with no definitive rules that need to be followed. And HUD basically saying, you know, it's almost extortion. Do it and we'll give you the money. But you tell us where in the rules that we have to, you know, we need a pathway. And they're making it up as they go along.
You've said, I have to say, you've indicated that you were here when we had our last big flood.
Yeah.
We have been talking about our infrastructure
Yes.
and the need for new sewers and pipes. What role can the county play in this great need that we have in this area?
Well, what need can the county play with regard to infrastructure? A couple of things. First of all, you know, the state is getting a windfall, a one-time windfall of about $5 billion from the bank settlements. That money I have advocated, as our other county executives and other elected officials, that the state should use that money for infrastructure, period. Don't put it in the general fund. It'll just get washed away. It'll create new programs and higher taxes. Take this money one time and use it for sewer upgrades, water systems that desperately need it, roads and bridges that are falling apart. Maybe how do we pay for the Tappan Zee Bridge, since the bridge is already under construction? They don't know how they're going to pay for it. Money should be going to the bridge to keep the tolls down. These are the kind of things. Now, 2 years ago when we dealt with the storm, with the hurricane, one thing that we learned, as did most communities, is in the low-lying areas, in the basin areas, et cetera, you could have a lot of your infrastructure be completely ruined. And we had to deal with the Yonkers wastewater treatment plant, which was taking on water, and we made a decision to shut the plant down before the plant blew up. And the plant was out of service for a couple of months, but it saved us many, many months and a lot of money in doing that. But we said, well, wait a minute, we better do an infrastructure inventory. So we spent about $1 million on looking at all of our wastewater treatment plants, our pump stations, et cetera, and how to harden them for the next storm, because the next storm's coming. We don't know when, but the next storm's coming. So we can protect those. So when it is bad, we don't have sewer backups and flow into the Long Island Sound or to the Hudson. We have a capital budget in the county where we try to prioritize our roads and bridges based on ratings. And we're in that process right now, not only in the budget for the capital budget for next year, but there's a 5-year plan. So we're looking at the flooding issues, not just here, but all over. We've done work in the Bronx River because we own the Bronx River, so there's no red tape. We can just go in, and we have, and I have, and we've cleaned it up. But there are other issues. The Hutch, obviously, is brutal on a good day. And we've got, obviously, issues over here that affect the Long Island Sound, and we're dealing with that. We can play a role directly. Obviously, if we own the property or the infrastructure, it's our responsibility. But we have, here in Mamaroneck, played a role, and we will, going forward, with partnering with our communities, where we could spend up to half of the project. But what we did is we forced the municipalities to prioritize also. Otherwise, everyone just comes with a wish list and nothing gets done. But what's the most vital, what's the most vitally important, so we can try to work together on that.
Mary Lee?
Thank you. My issue, an issue for many of us, is the gun issue. We brought it up to you last time, and you spoke with considerable pride about your county gun show, which you have brought back, which I guess you assumed was needed. That is certainly your prerogative. The anniversary of Newtown is coming up. There are people in this room who actually knew some of the families in Newtown.
So did I.
You did as well. In terms of your recent campaign for governor, you stated you would get rid of the SAFE Act. You do not like New York State's SAFE Act. And then there's an additional effort to try to keep children safe with the Nicholas Act, to do safer storage at home, because there literally over 1,000 children die every year just by the accidents of guns in homes. I think it's 3,000. So my question to you, what would you say to a Newtown family, or those of us in the room, what do you say to yourself on this kind of issue? What is it that keeps it so important to you to get rid of an act that has meant so much? And on the mental health issue, They've just had a study that says, yes, it's a factor, but it by no means is the only factor.
The SAFE Act, and then I'll talk about what we're doing in Westchester, which I think is much more comprehensive and more important and ongoing, and that is safer communities. The SAFE Act is an issue that is, by law enforcement's own standards, not making much of New York any safer. And basically, the New York Times came to that same conclusion in a very lengthy front-page Sunday story about 2 months ago, that the SAFE Act isn't really doing anything. It was very cosmetic in nature and really is not doing anything to make New Yorkers safe. Well, I'm just saying what the New York Times wrote in their very lengthy report. It was found partially unconstitutional by federal judges. And so the SAFE Act itself was rammed through the legislature in the middle of the night, 2 in the morning, waiving all public comment, right, wrong, or indifferent on both sides. No public comment. Nobody saw what was in the bill. They had 20 minutes to vote on it. I think at least the standard 3 days where legislators could have read it and the public and press would have had a chance to comment on it, pro or con, should have happened. That process was destroyed. So I had as much passion about the process as I did with the product. With regard to what we did in Westchester, is we actually took our time. And we said, what are the root causes of these violent acts? We brought the CDC up from Atlanta. The Director of Violence Prevention came up from Atlanta. We worked with our nonprofits, our religious. We worked with our hospitals. We worked with our communities. And it is an ongoing process now where a lot of good has actually come out. We worked with public safety and all education. We had every public, private, and parochial school represented and every layer of law enforcement, including federal, national, local, at SUNY Purchase. And this was February of 13. And it was the first time that it ever happened where everyone was in the same room. And from that discussion came, and Bill Bratton was the featured speaker, and he basically said, look, we got to break down these silos because God forbid something happens, there's going to be a multi-jurisdictional response. And what are the best protocols for educators and law enforcement and parents dealing with that? That was the public safety side of it. And also how to harden the security in our schools, as well as the tactical response. The other part dealt with a lot of the mental health issues and the violence issues. And so we sort of zeroed in on a few things, including absenteeism in our schools. We're working with Yonkers and Mount Vernon, working with identifying the children who are chronically absent from schools. Because what we have found, and the statistics have borne out, is that if kids are not in school, mostly for invalid reasons, but sometimes they're valid reasons. But either way, if they're not in that classroom, the likelihood of them graduating diminishes greatly. The likelihood of them ending up on drugs or in gangs or in prison goes up tremendously. So identifying these issues. Also, suicide prevention. We're dealing with that right now, and protocols with our health. The issues of keeping guns out of the mentally ill and their hands. This is all part of our response to safer, what we call safer communities. You can have the national gun debate if you want to have that, but we're trying to have a what can we do that will make sense and actually affect lives here in Westchester. And so this has been a very comprehensive, so far 2+ years ongoing, that I'm proud to say our nonprofits, our mental health community, which has been very active in this, has really given very high grades. And it's not something that was a headline, that was not even implemented. There are many parts of the SAFE Act, by the way, that have never been implemented. Parts that were found unconstitutional. And if you have the New York Times saying that it was basically useless, then I prefer the route that we did, that actually looking at the root causes and how do we actually do something here in Westchester that'll protect our kids and give resources to where they're really needed. So we've been working with our mental health community very strongly on this. Oh yeah, we have right here. Yeah.
Rob, I just want to touch on two things that
Yes.
Melanie brought up. There's been a change in the culture in the courts as a result of these tragedies, which is essential to addressing this problem. We now, when we're signing a temporary order of protection, ask, do you own a gun? And believe it or not, that may not have been custom practice throughout the state. And there are many things in the works that are addressing the issues that were raised. So maybe if someone says, as a whole, the SAFE Act has problems, there are components that have produced change in a very positive way. Domestic violence, but there's a huge reliance on the courts and how we are encountering people at a first stage, that we need to do a better job of identifying people who it might be a problem going forward.
We also have here, and take these if you'd like them, they're also online. These are a Safer Communities blueprint of all the things that we have been doing. We just did, the last thing we did was crisis intervention, where we're working with all of the local police departments and the schools on how to deal with these crises. We had something that we already rolled out, youth mental health first aid. We were the first to do it countywide in New York. And this really is identifying and training. Identifying someone who's 12 to 18 years old who in some way might be crying out for help. And yet, as adults, oftentimes we don't know how to deal with it or we turn our head. But this is training coaches, teachers, others who come in contact with students and children to be sort of first responders, to deal with it, and then to turn it over to the mental health professionals. So a child who, for whatever reason, may be thinking about suicide or violence can be dealt with and hopefully healed. Yes, ma'am.
Garner and Ferguson and the protests that have spread, including to White Plains, and what the county is doing to prevent such citizen police incidents in the future?
Well, it starts in many ways with the training, and so we have been working with our police department because we run the police academy here in Westchester. So all of the local police departments use, as the rookies are training, they come through Westchester County's Police Academy. So we're working constantly on issues on how to deal with race relations, on how to deal with autistic kids when you respond, how to identify a child who might be autistic, and instead of taking one action, you're now dealing with it in a different way. These are the kind of things that have been ongoing. LGBT relations. You know, these are the kind of things that we've been putting into our police academy, working with even the disability community. So the sensitivity training is part of the ongoing. Look, race relations in this country are getting better or worse, depending on an incident sometimes. And sometimes they're below the surface and they pop up. You also have, I think, different ways to deal with it. Sometimes you're seeing the inflammatory leaders who are making the situation worse as opposed to trying to calm something and deal with it, which is the way I would prefer it gets done, because sometimes you're seeing it get worse and worse. Look, obviously this is it's a situation that has to be dealt with head on, because we can't have race relations get worse and worse in this country. And I think they're better than people think, but there are issues. There are issues, and you can't discard how African Americans feel about law enforcement. But you can't also just say all law enforcement is bad.
One of the things that I've wondered is whether if police weren't so, I don't want to say afraid, but concerned that whoever they've stopped or are talking to could have a gun, that perhaps it wouldn't escalate, so that if we had fewer guns on the streets, perhaps relations between citizens and police might be better.
Well, we all want those who don't deserve a gun. We all want illegal guns off the street. None of us want that. None of us want that. And by the way, you know, the segment of the population that is the biggest increase for gun ownership now? Women. In defense, domestic violence victims, single moms. There's a lot of reasons.
Can you answer the question about the Tappan Zee Bridge, how it's going to affect us? Do you think the tolls are going to go up? What about the traffic?
Yeah, these are going to go up.
Right. What about the traffic? How will that
well,
affect Westchester?
I applaud Governor Cuomo for getting the Tappan Zee Bridge done, for actually moving across the finish line, because there have been many governors who talked about it and no one got it done. So Governor Cuomo gets credit for actually getting this process finished and building it, because I think we do need a new Tappan Zee Bridge. I advocated for that even in my first year in office. And so I'm glad. And I'm on the task force that there's 31 members, I think it is, that is studying the mass transit needs. And I was a vocal opponent of, if you do not put mass transit on that new bridge, I will not support that new bridge. Because I couldn't see why we'd spend $5 billion on a 2018 version of a bridge that looks like and has the same capacity as a 1955 bridge without giving new transit options. And that was the original plan, to build a new bridge without any mass transit. So I was not going to lend my support, which was needed. I needed to vote yes on that on this committee in order for the state to get federal government loans. So only when the governor compromised and agreed to put dedicated lanes and to study in a short term mass transit options with a long-term view as well. So here's the problem now. There's no money dedicated for it, and there's no plan on how to implement mass transit options on the bridge. There will be the lanes, the dedicated lanes on the bridge when it opens. However, if you're in Rockland or you're in Westchester, once you get to the bridge, you're on the bridge and you can drive over. When you get off the bridge either way, you're stuck in traffic. So that's not a good plan. So what we've been looking at is how to make a hybrid of a bus rapid transit system, which would basically be almost like a train on wheels, where you'd have stops along the way, dedicated routes, car parking lots, and people could have a real option that will help this grow. The plan would be basically from the Palisades Center all the way across into White Plains, where there is a natural hub. How to get there is under discussion, because you've got 287, which is a problem, 119, which would require some areas where you'd have to veer off in order to get around some hot spots. But that's what they're studying. But it's sort of been a halt because the governor has not mentioned how to pay for the bridge. He admitted that he didn't have a plan a couple months ago yet, and what the tolls will be. Now, the George Washington Bridge, up to 14. And the projection is it'll be at 15 by 2018. So the Tappan Zee Bridge, which is 5 now, ain't staying 5. It's either going to go to 10 or it's going to go closer to 14 and 15, comparable with those, which is crazy. There's 2 spans, 1 span for each direction. Yes, sir. I think we got time for
Nina?
last one, I guess.
In discussing infrastructure,
yes.
What piece or amount of money is in the proposed county budget that's designated for improvement in our infrastructure? How much money is there to do, and what are the priorities?
Oh, well, there's a lot. I mean, there's just over here, Mamaroneck Avenue is one of them. I think, was it Murray Street is another. There's the Mamaroneck Avenue Bridge over the Mamaroneck River. I'm sorry, infrastructure for this area. And how much is in the budget for infrastructure? A lot of what we do, and define infrastructure though. Basically, it's roads, it's bridges, it's sewers. Absolutely. I mean, we're working. You saw the project that we did down the road. Which way am I looking at? That way, yeah. The Mamaroneck treatment. Where they had all the scaffolding and everything. That's basically done. BNR, bionutrient removal. That is doing very, very well in Mamaroneck, going to New Rochelle. We're dealing with that in New Rochelle. Those are hundreds of millions of dollars. That's a very expensive proposition, paid for by the people in that district. So the problem for so long has been so many things have been put off that everything's fallen apart. And that's why I say we've got to prioritize. So the fights that I have sometimes are, what's the real priority? And I would say that one of the real priorities is infrastructure. And, everyone wants a piece of something, which leaves not a lot left for the real things that have to get done. And the options in the highest tax county in America is just continue to raise taxes, which for me is not why I ran, and it's not why I'm on the job. It's to try to manage the balance that we need. So there's a lot of money in the, generally it's over $200 million each year for the capital projects. That's not all infrastructure. Some of it's our parks and some other projects, but the bulk of that does go to infrastructure.
Any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry, one last.
It's really like a comment. It seems to me that the county is held responsible for things that are really state and local. In other words, what the county does with property tax is tiny. It's the local communities with the property tax, and in terms of code and so forth, it's all state laws. And it seems to me that the county is being held responsible for things the state and the local communities. Now in Connecticut, they did away with the they did away with the counties.
Yes, they did. 1959, they did away with the counties in Connecticut. Yep. It was a statement. It was basically that the county, the role of county government, yeah. Yeah, you're correct. The role, basically what's the role of county? The county government, if you look in your tax bill, the county is about 15 to 20% of your total bill. The municipality that you live in is about 15 to 20, whatever, and the bulk of it is generally your schools. And you vote on that, and you can vote to override the cap or put down a budget, but you vote on that. The county is a creature of the state, and unfortunately, with these unfunded mandates that you've probably heard a lot about, right now 85 cents of every $1 we take in on the county property tax levy goes right to Albany for just 9 of their programs. So we're forced to do things that Albany doesn't pay for or partially pays for that we have to do with your tax dollars for their programs. And that's, I think, a very nonpartisan / bipartisan argument that most of us on the local areas always are saying about. You're crushing us, and we have to raise taxes to pay for your program, which leaves us nickels and dimes to do the things that we want to do on a local level. So, I agree with you. Could life go on without county government? Off the record, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming, and thank you, Robert. Have a good holiday. We'll see you in January. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.